Dan Perry here with another Dan on Tech Python video. Now let's talk about how we name objects or variables. Typically we use the term variable names, but object names are probably better. This includes naming of variables, of constants. It includes naming of functions, classes, and such. There are some rules. Variable names need to start with either a letter or the underscore character, and we'll talk about why you would start with underscores later. The remainder of the variable name or class name or function name can be letters, numbers, underscores. Doesn't matter what comes afterwards. Variable names are case sensitive, so capital A, lowercase b, is different from lowercase a, lowercase b. The names should be descriptive of what the identifier or variable contains. Naming something ABC, which we're going to use early on for simple variables and all, and looking at assigning variables are fine. But later on, we want to name things such as total sales, population, city, street, things that really tell us what that identifier, what that variable contains. We're going to use underscores between words, and that's true for when we're identifying variables and things. Variable names and functions should all be in lowercase and underscores between the words. When we look at class names, it is traditional to use Pascal case, or also called cap words, where the first letter of each word in it is capitalized, but there are no underscores. If you come from an environment that you've been using cap words or camel case or some other naming convention, those are perfectly acceptable. However, as you become more and more Pythonic, as you work with Python more and more, you'll probably start migrating to what most Python programmers use. For example here, total underscore sales, that's great. Gross underscore profit, underscore user underscore name. All of those fit the way Python users work. You wouldn't use big space numbers. The blank space doesn't work. Value, not recommended for variables where the B is and the V, that's the Pascal case. The street address, that is camel case. Although they're perfectly valid, they'll work. They're not recommended for variables, functions. The big value would be recommended or used for classes. So when we get into working with classes, then you may use that. Use whatever convention you choose, but understand that maybe the company you work for may have some rule for naming, or set of guidelines, and you're going to have to learn to use those guidelines. So I could, for example, say total underscore sales equal 100. Now, we've not really talked about the equal sign yet, but a single equal sign is called an assignment operator, and it basically says whatever's on the right, assign it to the variable name, the identifier on the left. So this would assign total sales, the variable, the identifier total sales, the value of 100. I could say username equals Dan, and that would assign underscore user underscore name the value of Dan. If I wanted to see what type of variable total sales were, I could do ID and in parentheses total sales. And I'm sorry, not ID, type. ID gives the unique identifier, which we'll be looking at a little bit later. And it says it's an integer. If I do type for underscore user underscore name, says it's a class of a string, and we can look and see that. Now, I jumped ahead to the ID. Identifiers or variables have an ID. The ID or identifier identifies it. And we have certain types of values that, even though we say variables are not variable, they are fixed, we say they are immutable. Integers, strings, floats, those data types are called immutable. They can't change, yet it appears they do change. So if we look right now, the total sales data type, we've got it there. If I say total sales equals 200, it didn't give me an error. If I do my type of total sales, and I'm going to be a little lazy, and I'm going to come up here and copy it and then paste it in, it's still an integer. If I look at the ID for total sales, you'll see the ID is also here, showing the, again, the identifier for it, but notice it is different. The first few numbers are the same, but the original 100 ended in 9920. This one ends in 3120. It's still the identifier name total sales, but it has a different ID. That means it's actually a different variable. And this is hard to understand if you come from a language like C, C++, Java, where if you change the value of an integer, it's called a mutable or a changeable value. Now I'm going to go ahead and come down here, and I'm going to change it back to 100, and then I'm going to look at the ID, and the ID has gone back to the original ID for total sales. So as long as it has a value of 100, it is going to have that same ID. Meaning that what really happened was when we changed the value of total sales, we actually created a whole new identifier still looking as total sales, and the original one did not change. Again, this is the idea of mutable or changeable versus immutable or unchangeable in these values for integers and floats. Very different from other languages. Other languages may have mutable objects and immutable objects, unchangeable objects. Think of those as constants. But typically we can't use the variable name, the identifier name, and redefine it in those. We can do that in Python. What happens ultimately is that if we don't use that original total sales with a value of 100 for a while, it will eventually clean that out of memory. And that's beyond anything we want to get into right now, how it does that and how it makes those decisions, but it does. So there is how we can name our variables and a little bit about how we can use them. Thank you for watching this Dan on Tech video. Please subscribe to this playlist so you don't miss future videos. Please check out and subscribe to our other Dan on Tech channel playlists.